Welcome to Lean Into Leadership, where we lead the conversation about anything and everything leadership related. On today's episode, Dan Gaken returns to the show. Welcome back to Lean Into Leadership. This is episode 16. My name is Brandon Skiles. I'm your host, featuring Dan Gaken today. Dan currently serves as the director of the Sarah R. Opperman Leadership Institute at Central Michigan University. You've been in that role for almost, 2 decades? Getting close to that?
Well, this is my 22nd year working the Leadership Institute at CMU, plus my time as a student,
right.
Which that's a valuable experience. We can count that too.
Yeah.
But I've been the director here since 2009.
Okay, so we're getting there. Not quite 20 years, but soon, right? You're also serving in the director role of the Student Activities and Involvement Office here as well, which is kind of a new addition towards your leadership here at CMU. And you've really dedicated your career to developing skills in young people and giving them that confidence to find their passion and to go and lead in this world. And so I'm excited to jump into that. In addition to, you've authored a book. You've spoken across the whole entire country. You continue to provide leadership development and training to different sectors, whether it's government, nonprofit, business. And so really the leadership legend we got in the studio. So pumped for this. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show too. You're always one of our most requested guests. So
I would like to say I'm happy to be here, but I'm here every day.
Right.
But I'm excited to be on the show again with you, Brandon.
We're in the studio,
Yes.
right? So last time we sat down, we talked about core values and ethical leadership. It was a great conversation. Today we're going to jump into kind of focusing on emotional intelligence, and then also to the multiplication effect of leadership, right? Building other leaders. I think that's a piece that is highly undervalued and super important. You have a lot of experience in there, so I want to jump in and give the viewers some cool stuff. So Dan, how do you define emotional intelligence, also known as EQ? We're going to use that interchangeably. And why is it such a critical part of effective leadership?
Well, the funny part is I don't like to define things by what they're not, but I think for so many of us, when we're talking about EQ, it's natural to compare that to IQ, right?
Yeah.
We all know what IQ is, right? This number, right? 1 to 200 and something. And this is not settled science, but most of the psychology, most of the biology around IQ says that our intelligence is driven mostly by genetics, by our DNA, right? How smart you are you're born with what you have. Now, whether or not we live in a world where everybody has the access to achieve that potential, that's a very different story. Sure. But one of the things I truly love about EQ or emotional intelligence is that it's a process, right? It's something we can practice. It's something we can learn. And when we're talking about EQ, right, we're talking about how people relate. Sometimes we'll say reading the room or understanding the folks around you. And the beauty of this is, right, when we talk with folks, if we talk with employers, and CMU is part of the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and we ask people, right, what are you looking for when you're hiring college graduates? What matters more? Is it IQ or is it EQ? And every time, folks will tell us EQ. Now, you need to be able to do the job, right? You need the basic skill set, you need those proficiencies. But if I were to ask you, do you want to work with somebody that you enjoy spending time with, that's a team player, that cares about your success, or do you want to hire the brightest person in the room? Well, right, if they're just miserable and make people miserable around them, folks don't want to work with that person. And so IQ matters, but EQ matters more. And the beauty of that is we can help students grow and develop and expand their capacity.
Love that. It's interesting too, because I think a lot of people say EQ matters, but you see a lot of the time different organizations, they're hiring this person with the most skills who's detrimental to that culture. And so it's really interesting, right? I think sometimes it's one of those things like we know what we're looking for, we still don't always,
Well, and that's the other side of that too is if we find somebody who's got talent, right? Yeah. Somebody who is uniquely situated or creative, if we buy into this idea that EQ matters and we name that, we spend some time working with that, we can grow that capacity in folks. And so, like a lot of things, people have natural abilities or tendencies. There are people this comes easy to. I'm not one of them. I mean, you know this, right? I have poor social skills. I joke all the time with students, right? If you've met my partner, Aaron Smith Gaken, who's been on the show and worked on camp, students love her. They adore her because she's funny, she's personable, and I'm not. But I can work on that, right? Yeah. And so I think that's part of this too, is if we take a look at IQ versus EQ, it's important to remember that we have capacity to grow in our EQ.
Absolutely. I think that leads into our next question too. As a leader, then how do you go about creating a culture where EQ is developed, valued, and practiced consistently across a team or organization and really, again, emphasized?
So many organizations, right, whether we're talking about valuing EQ or if we're valuing integrity or those organizational values, very often, right, we make this joke, missions and vision statements, what do we do with them? Well, we put them on the website, but do we spend time with those?
Yeah.
And so I believe here in the Leadership Institute, right, we've made the growth and capacity and emphasis on relationships, right, we've made that a hallmark of what we do in the Leadership Institute. And so I think naming that and then acting on it, and it really is that simple, to tell folks it matters how you treat people. It matters, if it's an expectation, if you're part of this team, that you take time to get to know the people that you work with, that you understand that your success is my success. And what we want to do is create a space where we're asking others to help people thrive. And to do that means I need to know what you're good at. I need to know what you want from this experience. I need to understand that so I can equip and set you up to be successful.
Awesome. And so speaking of kind of developing emotional intelligence, right, there's 4 domains. If you want to jump into those a little bit for our audience who might not be aware, how can folks actually practice and grow? And everyone's a little bit different, but what are some of those, maybe some tips and tricks people can do in each of those areas?
Right, when we're talking about EQ, I think folks know this, right? It's like a BuzzFeed quiz, something you find on Facebook. It tells you what Disney princess you are, right? Of course, that's bullshit, right? But there is a science behind this, right? When we think about the 2 halves to emotional intelligence, even before we get to those 4 domains and the 4 steps, the first part of that is that interpersonal competency, right? That I need to know myself. That I need to understand my own triggers, what causes me to feel emotion, and how I respond to that, right? Because that interpersonal piece, knowing self and looking inward, is it's necessary for me to translate to that other half, right? The social component of that, about how I interact with others. And so the very first piece, right, if we're talking about that first domain, and I say this like emotional intelligence is 4 steps. I know that that's oversimplified, right? That what we're asking folks to do, this takes work and it takes time and it takes practice. But that first domain is being self-aware. And I will tell you that, especially for young leaders, as they're learning who they are, they're going through identity development, whether that's political identity or their leadership identity. All of these identities that they're learning and connecting with, that self-awareness takes a lot of work. And so I don't say that, I don't want to say that too casually, but it does. To be able to know that first part is self-awareness, that I know what makes me feel anxious, what makes me feel hopeful, what makes me question my abilities, and right, so knowing what those are becomes step 1. The second step then is that self-management. And that's one of the most beautiful parts about leadership, is that you get to decide who you want to be. And so how I show up, how I respond to those, right, and I want to be clear here, right? There are times our body, we've got a physiological response, right? If you're crossing a sidewalk and that light changes from walk to don't walk and traffic's coming at you, you feel that adrenaline rush.
For sure.
Right there, there's, from an evolutionary standpoint, there's an advantage to our bodies for us to feel that rush of, hey, I got to get out of the way of traffic. But there's no need ever for us to feel that way interacting with another person. But that's not to say that we don't, right? And so those emotions are real. Those come from somewhere. And those are your truth. I don't want to tell folks to disregard that. But when we pause for a second and we remember, I get to decide how I want to respond and how I want to show up, that's being emotionally intelligent. Because that second domain is that emotional self-management, right? That I know what causes me to feel hope or love or anxiousness, but how I respond is a choice.
Absolutely.
So we take that, you're looking at me like, Dan, I asked you about 4 domains and you told me 2. So the translation then, right? Once I'm comfortable with who I am, that I know what causes me to feel those emotions, and I make decisions about how I show up, right? What emotions I show. when I cross that domain into that social component, then the next part is for me to realize that my emotions also have an impact on you. But that I also, and that's when we talk about this, and so really that third step of this is displaying, is living, is having empathy.
Yeah.
And that in itself, right, that every one of these is a major step, right, for me to be self-aware, to know who I am.
Yeah.
That's something, as you mentioned, right, I've been doing this work for 20 plus years, and I like to think I'm still learning who I am as a leader, as a father, as a friend, all of these things. We're growing in that area. And so this is work that's never done. And I think that's important to say that when we're talking emotional intelligence. It's a process.
Yeah.
And that means we can practice it and grow it, but it also means I'm never done learning that.
Yeah.
But now when I talk about, these other domains and having empathy, now, right, that's when this becomes infinitely complex. Because now I don't just need to understand my emotions, how I'm showing up, but that's everybody on my team, or if I'm in a classroom, every student in that space. And that's when I think when we present, and I tell folks this all the time, I believe that emotional intelligence is the foundation and the heart of good leadership. But I don't want to pretend that means that leadership's easy, right? This is hard.
It's hard.
It's incredibly challenging, right? When we're in spaces with folks who want different things, and that's okay, who have different backgrounds and different experiences, and I need to understand all of that to effectively work with, to lead, to be part of that team. I understand that becomes a big ask. But when we're talking about empathy, I think so often empathy becomes oversimplified, right? I think, right, because there are stages of empathy, right? If we're talking, and for me, if we're talking about cognitive empathy, right, that I understand what you believe. To me, at its basis, that's about human dignity. I do believe that we owe that to every person we share this planet with, for you to understand their truth. And for me to understand that your truth, your lived experience, the way you see this world, might be different than mine. And if those don't align, that doesn't mean that's not your experience. I don't get to decide that, right? Your truth is your truth. And so at the very base, right, if we think about, and I know some of our students, I know some of our colleagues, I know myself personally. In the last few years, as I'm reading am I giving away my age? If I'm reading a newspaper in the morning, or if I'm watching the news, right, or if I'm scrolling TikTok, right? Is that more relatable? Right. So as I'm hearing about what's happening in the world around me, there are times where I just want to shout at my phone, right? And I know a lot of folks have felt that way. And what we're doing there, I believe, right? I believe this to my core, that we owe it to every person on this planet to try and understand why they believe what they believe. If we're talking about things that truly are I like to, if we're talking about things that feel like they're truly settled science. I mean, if we're talking about global warming or climate change, right? That's real, right? Every piece of empirical evidence points to this, saying this is impacting our world. But we have some folks out there that are climate science deniers. And one of our responses could be to laugh at them and be like, this is absurd, right? Every piece of data, right? Every credible scientist. Folks are saying our climate is changing, and the overwhelming preponderance of the evidence says that humans are playing a role in this. We could laugh at folks that don't believe this, right? How can you believe that to be true? But it is one of my most sincere beliefs that if I want to change hearts and minds, if I want to have a meaningful conversation with somebody, that I need to understand why they believe that that's true. And so, I don't want to jump ahead here, but right, that last dimension, the key to this, it brings it all together, to being emotionally intelligent, is practicing active listening. And right, so if that is your lived experience, if you are telling me, Dan, I don't believe, I don't believe that the earth is changing, right? Well, tell me why you believe that. What are your data points? Where are you, let's interrogate, where are you getting this information? What's the veracity of that? And to have a conversation, and I need to, when I engage with this at that level, it means I also, if I'm asking you to be open to changing your opinion, it means I need to listen to you in a way that means I'm also open to the idea that I could be wrong. Yeah. And that's a big statement, right? For a leader today, and I think that's that's what we don't have enough of. Folks with that humility to say, I could be wrong. Let me hear what you have to say. I'm open to this.
Right. Well, sometimes it's not even like, you might not be wrong either, right? There might be more than just yes or no, right? I think a lot of times we look in that black and white area when everything's gray, right? And so finding those different, or that commonality. But I think that is a huge problem, and I'm glad you mentioned that. It is a huge piece of emotional intelligence that we're seeing right now in our society. People aren't having those conversations, right? Typically better in person, right? Because you can feel and see those emotions versus, through virtual means. But that is such an important skill that I think needs to be developed a lot more. And you're so right, though, especially, and everyone has those different topics, right, or things that they're passionate about, or maybe you're triggering. And so finding that, and if you, again, knowing yourself, right, it all ties in. You're able to maybe have that opening and that curiosity, right, the open mind through that. So is there an area or one of those domains that you've kind of struggled with in your development, and maybe how have you approached growing in that?
Well, they're all hard. They're all hard. I think, and I don't want to jump ahead in this because I do think that they're sequential. I think I need to know myself, but I also recognize that I want to be doing work in all those areas concurrently.
For sure.
And so for me, I find that where I get the greatest return is when I practice that active listening. It's right. You mentioned that I often speak at other campuses or universities and so what I do, I make a hallmark a lot of my presentations talking about emotional intelligence. And when I get to the end of it, it's kind of a joke with some of these audiences where I say, and really, if you want to be a successful leader, you need to practice listening. And they're like, well, Dan, you're a motivational speaker. That's kind of self-serving, right? But I think, because we don't do that day to day, do we? There's so much of our lives where we're having conversations with people, right? And we believe we can multitask. And we can be doing things at the same time, but our brain is truly not focusing or giving it that kind of undivided attention. And we live in a world where we're asked to do that more. We live in a world where things are competing with our interests, whether that's media, the world that we live in. Things are competing for our attention and interest in ways they never have.
Lots of distractions.
One of the things, even coming in here today, I put my phone on the table, and then I made sure to take off my watch, because even if I'm talking to you, but I can tell that, especially this time of year. And I don't know,
we'll probably come out. We're
as we enter the holiday season right now. Boy, I love watching my watch, because every 15 minutes there's another. Oh, your package is shipped.
Oh,
right? It's exciting.
It's dopamine.
It's right. It is. And I like to be on top of things, so I get most of my holiday shopping done September, October. So when those Black Friday deals hit, when those Cyber Monday deals hit, I don't need that stuff. But I mean, these packages now, these are treats for me. But if we're talking about, look at how easily it is to get distracted.
Sure,
that was not on your script today.
Which is okay, right?
But if we're talking about active listening, one of the true challenges for that is we don't do that, right? And one of the things that I will very often do in trainings is we will set time aside, and I will ask people to write about a prompt in a journal or in a workbook sheet. And I tell them that is yours. And I tell them that they're not going to turn that sheet in, but I will tell them that I'm going to invite them to share from that. And so for them to have some time to think about that, because the point of the exercise is not that reflection, it's not that sharing. It's to give them a chance to practice listening to somebody else. And we will do that, right? And listening can look very differently. I think for a while, when we talked about listening, we define that very much through a lens of somebody from a neurotypical lens, right? That we're making eye contact, that our body language, that we've squared our shoulders up, or we're sitting knee to knee and we're connecting. But we know now that looks different for folks. So how do I, when you're listening, make sure that what I'm doing is listening to understand, right? And I think one of the best, I think some of the best times we have in our offices, if we're arguing about sports, or just, and for folks that don't know, right, everybody knows that, Brandon was a highly accomplished hockey player, was president of the club hockey team here too. But this guy knows his sports. Like, his baseball history is on par with, he knows this stuff. And so it's fun to have these conversations. And sports are one of those, I think, that lend itself to, right, we can argue about that.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that could be a model, right? You might have different favorite players or moments, or you might even have seen a play. If we're thinking about replay review, we might watch the same play.
Yeah.
We're watching the same screen, same slow motion, and you're saying he got the call right. And I'm over here wanting to throw something like he blew that call, right? I think that highlights what we're talking about here. But I think when we talk about sports, there's an ability for us to recognize that we're going to have differences of opinions and that's okay. But when we're talking about this, that listening to understand, right? That when you're telling me why this is the greatest team that's ever been assembled, and you've got your data points to prove this, that I'm listening to that and I'm trying to understand why that's your argument, as opposed to in the back of my mind telling you, no, here's why the 2016 Chicago Cubs were the greatest. 103 wins, right? It's not that often that the team with the most wins at the end of the season is holding a World Series trophy. It's hard to do. Yeah. If I am just refuting your points in my mind, if I'm preparing my argument, I'm not listening to you.
Yeah.
And we just don't do that often enough, right? And so, and one of the things I do when I'm working with groups, when I'm talking with folks, I'll ask people, have you ever had a conversation with somebody that you care about, where you could tell they weren't listening? And universally, right, the room will raise their hand, and it's one of those things where, you're on the phone with somebody and you're saying, hey, what are our plans this weekend? Or what do you want for dinner? And you hear them say, uh-huh. You're like, that was not a yes or no question, right? What does that feel like? Right? It makes you feel about this big. You don't have the time to listen to me, to understand, but then it's a very humbling moment, because immediately following that, I'll ask folks, how many of you have done that to another person, a person that you care about? Right? And we all have.
Yeah, right.
And it's that reminder that there's nothing more powerful we can do than to give somebody our time, right? Yeah. To say, I'm here for you. There's nothing else on my calendar right now. I'm present. I want to spend this time to understand you. And I think that piece of respecting human dignity, of telling people they matter, is a powerful movement by a leader. But it also makes you better, because now I understand that person I'm having a conversation with. And so that's the longest possible answer to your question of which of these do you start with. If people would practice listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, there's your self-awareness coming in, right? Knowing that that's an area. And I think what you said too about the distractions, it's so true. We live in a world that's so many distractions, right? You mentioned your watch. Yeah. It's simple, small things we don't even realize. And so I'd probably agree that's probably the same one. My wife would probably be like, yeah, definitely active listening you could work on. But is there ways to practice that skill, or to almost work on being present in the moment? Because again, we all live so busy lives, right? And so, and I always remember hearing this, I think it was Simon Sinek, he was talking about an example kind of around this, right? But that people first focus on leadership, and how, so many of us will walk the hall and say, how are you doing, right? Yeah. And it's good, and you walk by, right? Or maybe I don't have time to answer. It's well, if you ask that question, right? It's your job to come here and understand, because someone might actually share, maybe they've been struggling, right? Or maybe they're doing great. And so, not just brushing through that, because it just almost becomes kind of natural in our communication, right? And we almost do it out of, because it's the polite thing to do, but we're not actually interested.
Right.
And so how do folks maybe identify those things? And again, everyone's gonna be different, but are there maybe some themes there that make sense?
Finding something that's your reminder.
Okay.
And in the most formal setting, right? Sometimes following a training, we'll give folks an active listening guide. And it talks about what are some of those benchmarks in that process. But active listening truly starts with inviting somebody to share and meaning it, right? And so, like you said, that example of walking down the hallway, and we've all done that. You walk down the hallway, how you doing? Am I really asking, right? Not just am I listening to that response, but if I'm walking down the hallway, hey, how you doing? Am I asking folks to tell me how they're doing?
Right.
And here's the reality for that, right? I think that's a good measure of our emotional intelligence, because folks that I've built a relationship with, I would hope it's not that I ask how you doing, because I probably do that to folks that are anybody that's walking down the hall.
Yeah. But
folks that are on my team, or students in my class, or people that I've spent time with, it's not that moment, right? When I ask how you're doing, that's not that moment that invites them to share. It's the cumulative impact of our relationship to that point, right? Do they know that when I ask that it's sincere and meant, right? Have we spent that time together? Have I done the work in listening to them? So when I say, how are you doing? That there's a trust and a rapport that they can tell me how they're doing. Because that's a risk, right?
Yeah.
You walk down that hall, that's an exchange, that's a social contract. How you doing? You know, hanging in there, right? How you feeling today? Unstoppable, right? Whatever. But if someone says, how you doing? For somebody to say, actually, it's kind of tough right now. Do you have a minute?
Yeah.
That's a risk, isn't it? But for me as a leader, if I've gotten to a spot with somebody where I say, how you doing? And they say, can I grab a minute? That's the ultimate compliment to me as a leader, because it tells me I've done the work for this person to trust that they can take that risk.
Yeah. Love that. You can also probably reframe that question too, right? If you want to engage in that a little bit as well. But no, that's definitely helpful, I think. Let's see here. How would you describe a little bit more too about your own emotional intelligence, evolution throughout your leadership and development, right? You can think, from, young college Dan to you today. And then what's changed the most over the years within that?
Well, maybe I'll start with that last. What's changed the most over the years is that I think I now understand both the importance of this, and I'm really not that good at it.
Yeah.
It's humbling in a sense, right? I think about my career in student affairs, and I remember when I was, I started in the Leadership Institute immediately out of undergrad.
Yeah.
I was a Central Michigan University graduate. I was exploring careers in student affairs, and I was all set. I was planning on attending another institution to earn a master's degree when I had a fantastic opportunity to do a 1-year provisional role in the Leadership Institute, right? 22 years later. I'm still at the same desk, right? But when I started, I remember thinking, I'm so good at this, right? Students adored me. I had fantastic relationships with students. When we were doing workshops, I remember every day just thinking, wow, I crushed that. Like, look how good I am at connecting with students. What I didn't know is because I was only 6 months older than them, right? This was my peer group. And as I grew in this role, as I grew professionally, and my portfolio changed, and I was spending less time with students and doing some things, I started to notice that maybe I wasn't as skilled at that as I thought. And then I had that realization that rapport I was building was very natural. And these were folks that I had a lot in common with. And I do. I think about our students today, and I still do think, right, we share a lot, right, in terms of values, time together. But they're lived, I'm in a different world than they are now. We joke about the social media. I'm not on the same news feed that they're on for some of these things. And so for me to connect with students now requires work. It requires me to be a little bit more authentic. It requires a higher degree of vulnerability. But I think that awareness of that, right? For me to say, this is not something that just happens. This is something I need to plan for and take time to. And so, right, to your question about how do we make sure that we're doing this? Naming it, right? And saying, this is something I want to work on. And what is that, what is that token, or what's that thing that helps us remember that? For some folks, it can be putting a sheet under a desk pad that's an active listening guide. For some folks, maybe it's a quote that you see in the morning. For a lot of folks, I've seen folks that getting back to those 4 domains, making sure you're connecting at step 1. Folks that journal, right? Or folks that clear their mind by going for a jog in the morning, or do they do a reflective exercise, or even something as simple as practicing gratitude at the end of the day? Right? What's one thing you're thankful for, or something that happened today that grounds you and reminds you why you do this? And I think that comes back to those relationships, and that part of self-awareness is that I need to practice my listening.
It's all connected, right? Just finding where to kind of work on that, and like you said earlier, right? It's the evolution, right? It's a life work, just like anything really positive. It seems like. Kind of a segue into our next topic. and it still connects to this as well, but what does building leaders mean to you? And how do you approach that? Or what have been some strong ways you've done that?
Building leaders is leadership. I mean, right? In the most, I know I just said that, emotional intelligence is leadership. And these things can both be true, because that's how we build leaders. But if I think about the things that I do well, and whatever that might be, right? If that's in a group project, if that's designing programs, if that's, I wish, boy, it was humbling to think, what do I do well, and then run out of a list of things I do well very quickly into that. But whatever, hypothetically, if I think about the things that I do well, that I bring to a team, and I hope everybody knows what they're good at and their strengths, and they take pride in their contributions. No matter how skilled or how good I am at that, the extent of that is limited by how much time I have for that project. There's a capacity piece there. And so when I think about what we do here, your introduction was too long. Like, nobody wants to hear 2 minutes of my resume and accomplishments, but I appreciate it.
Maybe they do,
I'm proud of a lot of the things that I've done here. But one person is not an institute.
Right.
And so I think about what we've done collectively brings me so much more pride about the number of students that we've connected with and supported. And so building leaders is leadership. My contributions can be measured in a work day, right? Or across a career. But if we're talking about building movements, if we're talking about actually changing the world, that is work that can't be done alone, right? And I want to be clear.
For sure.
One person matters.
Yeah.
Your efforts matter. One person can make a difference. But if we're talking about creating change, the minute I added you to our team, our capacity's doubled, right?
Yeah.
And I know you do this too. You do this with every leader advancement scholar. You do this with every student that comes through your office. You're building that capacity in them. Now it's not the two of us doing this work, right? It's a movement. And our impact becomes exponential. And so investing in others is the true way to see results in leadership.
Sure. I think too, a lot of people sometimes maybe not necessarily struggle with that, but that idea of maybe sometimes it comes from wanting to grow and develop themselves in a certain skill set, and then finding it's almost kind of that shift piece, which can be kind of challenging. Were you always good at that? Because I think you do a great job of that, of finding ways for other people to grow and thrive. Or did that take some work too? Thinking, as you've grown through your career.
No, I think about some of those. I was fortunate when the Leadership Institute was young. When I was a student employee here, my first few years as a professional, I was surrounded by incredibly talented people, and I always have been. Right? I think about one of my mentors, Dyke Heinze, or Nathan Westfall, or Brian Pridgeon, or Linda Sutalski, like those folks that were in here at the start. And even that next generation of folks, right, as we got started, Jesse Parker and Nate Dahlman, and those folks that built this into the nation's best leadership program. But there was a period in there where the university had some serious budget reductions. There was a period there where I was the only professional in this office for about 3 years.
Which is wild.
And it was, right?
You're doing so much at the time too.
We think about the program offering, and I think at that point, I felt singularly responsible for the success of this, and that can't be, a movement can't be about one person, right? It does need to be shared, right? But I became so focused, or maybe it was tunnel vision, right? Of this idea that I was delivering all aspects of this, from Leadership Safari to Leadership to working with LAS and the workshops and RSOs and all of the things that we were doing. And so every aspect of the department had my signature on it, right? Or my fingerprints, or it was my work. And I took a great degree of pride in that, but that's not the best way to do this. And I think that coming out of that, when I realized, having other folks have their hands in this, having them put their spin on this, having them make this in their image, that's our right. This is the best leadership institute we've ever had, and I say that with all sincerity, knowing I care deeply about the folks who came before, but I also and I believe this because of what I believe in leadership. As we close 2025, I think the 2026 leadership institute will be better than the one we're in right now, right? And that's when this is done well. That's how this works. And because you're going to be better at what you do next year. Mei Ling is going to have one more year of Safari experience. Veronique's going to have a full year of the Leadership Institute 100%. Under her belt, right? The capacity we had. And so it took me a while to learn that about truly believing in the power of a team.
I appreciate you sharing that too, because I think that is, again, can be kind of challenging, especially when you put so much time and energy into something, or that passion and building it out, and it's a different skill set, right, of focusing on a team. So one thing that you do incredibly well, in my opinion, is giving, and a lot of others as well, in emerging leaders opportunities to stretch and grow and really just find a place to try new things but also fail safely, which I think is so important. Again, kind of maybe touching into what we just talked about. How did you develop that mindset, one? And then I think you talked about it a little bit, but how has that shifted over time as well?
Well, I think that I appreciate you saying that. But I think that's because people gave me that chance. Right? I think about when I was a student in this office, I was doing work that, I still can't believe that folks trusted me to spend that amount of money creating programs, or to take an idea that I was passionate about and run with it. And so many of those things that were, I've said this before, right? The best ideas on this campus have always come from students.
100%.
We do things, sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. But the things that are that have lasted, the things that have been, our flag, if I'm thinking about programs like Impact or Leadership Safari, students created those, right? And we can help put guardrails on, help secure resources, but when that's done well, it's because students are doing that work. And so I think folks that are innovative, folks that are building things that last, folks that are building things that are truly special, understand if you're doing that in, with complete safety or without taking risks, those are going to be bland. Those are not going to be exciting. Those are not going to be that big leap forward, right? And that's what we're looking for. Right? I think about some of these big ideas that we've had that have come from students that have transformed programs. We just returned from Connections. It's a fantastic, right? It's one of my favorite weekends of the year. And every year, right, we get students after that say, this was amazing. I want to be part of the Leadership Institute movement. Can I help plan this? Right? Every campus, and this is not a knock against other leadership programs. Everybody does a leadership conference. We've got a lot of talent on this campus. Faculty, staff, students, folks with expertise in leadership. Everybody does that. We're gonna book some conference rooms and pick some sessions. That's not magic. But we had a group of students that said, can we take this off campus? And that, that was an odd ask, right? When I took that to senior officers at the university and said, we've done this in the university center for a long time, but what about a water park? Right? And what we found is it transforms that experience for students, right? Get off campus at a point of year when everybody's stressed out, when everything's due, but for 24 hours, we're gonna set this down and we're gonna go play. You get a chance to unapologetically be yourself, enjoy that moment, and now here you are surrounded by 150 of your peers. You can't go back to your residence hall room. You can't go back to your apartment because that bus doesn't leave until tomorrow. We're going to make friends. We're going to make connections. We're going to talk about things that we wouldn't have time to talk about on campus because we're too busy. I talked about that, minimizing distractions, and we're helping students do that. That's one of those things where, that was a risk. And an expensive one. But to get to a spot where we're going to support student ideas, and that's become one of our greatest traditions.
Absolutely. Love that example. In your experience, what does a positive leadership development culture look like? And what does it take to build and sustain one?
A positive leadership development culture has there's a couple of hallmarks to that. One, like I said before, we believe that everybody success is shared, right? If you get recognition for a job well done, that doesn't mean that I didn't. It means our team is thriving, right? And for us to truly celebrate others, to contribute to that, and to see your success as my responsibility, right? That is my job, to set folks up to be successful in what they do. And so that's certainly a part of it. Okay. There's that belief that we're going to try things, right? That risk taking, and not that that you're going to make mistakes and learn from them, but that where it matters, that when we make mistakes, the team is going to be there to pick you up, right? Sure. And to cover for that, and to make sure that work gets done, to make sure that is still delivered and delivered at a high quality, and that's because we trust and care for each other, right? And so you build that environment where folks care for each other. They're gonna support each other, but then that recognition that once we're there, our job's not done, is to bring other folks in.
Perfect, love it. How do you identify leadership potential in someone who maybe doesn't see it in themselves yet, and encourage them to try those new opportunities and take that first step?
Well, I think that's even the phrasing that, right? When folks say, do you identify leadership potential? Anyone can do this, right? There's nothing I do that's magic, or right? And so it's not identifying leadership potential in somebody, because I believe that's in every person. Okay. What I want to do is help them find out what that passion is, where that talent is, and where their skills, where their abilities, and their interests come together, and where they can lead, right? For some folks, that's going to be as a captain or president of a hockey club. For some folks, that's going to be in our volunteer center with alternative breaks. For folks who don't, and leadership self-efficacy is a part of what we do, because we do have folks who come and have not seen that leader in them that we see. And so that is about confidence. It's about connection. It's about putting them in spots that will help ignite something in them, where they believe in something so strongly enough that it's not a choice anymore, right? They're compelled to create change, to give their talent, and they may not see it yet, but folks around them will see that leader.
Love that. I think too, a lot of folks think about that in the way of, we look at leadership a lot, and I think outside of here and other learning environments of that leadership role, right? You're a leader only if you have that role. Right. You talked about it, anyone can lead, right? It takes a lot of work. It's a choice, right? And something that's always ever going, right? To be successful, an effective leader. Thinking about maybe a student who's in maybe a student org, right? Or in a team who wants to bring in a positive leadership development culture there, but has a group of people that maybe only see leadership as leadership roles. How can they break against that barrier and really inspire, just make folks realize that not anyone can lead, and you don't need that title to lead?
I don't think you even need to break down that barrier, right? Because good leadership ends in results. Yeah. Simple as that, right? And so you might not be the president, you might not hold an office in that organization, but what does success look like, right? What does change look like? Are we talking about implementing a new program that folks are excited about? Are we talking about changing organizational culture? From wherever you're at in the organization, do it, right? And so what you're going to find, if we're talking about power, about that ability to create change, there's lots of ways to do that other than holding an office, right? Yeah. You can do that because folks will follow you because they've seen you do that work, right? And part of that is you might not have that title, but if you have that influence, and that doesn't happen at that first meeting, right? That takes time. You need to show up, you need to do the work, you need to, and sometimes that takes a while, but you will build that capital to create change. And so you don't need permission to change this world, right? You don't need permission to make your student organization better. You don't need that platform of an office to do it, although sometimes that makes it easier. Yeah. But even without that, there are a few things in this world that are as powerful as a good idea.
Great. On the flip side of that, then, kind of going in, if you, let's say you are in that position, right, you're wanting to make change, and maybe there's some type of hierarchy in there, right, and someone maybe, whether that's, maybe they're threatened by that, or, just they shut down those ideas, how can you approach that conversation or that situation, I guess you could say, with those folks?
So much of leadership is about creating value for others.
Yeah.
And so, and part of that, I mean, to bring this back to emotional intelligence, right? If there is, in that example, right? If we're in a student organization and one of us has positional power and maybe is threatened by younger members or members without office that are, that are becoming advocates, that are creating change, right? There's a natural tension there, right? And we see that in organizations for folks that hold positional power and say, you went over my head on this, or you went around me in this organization. Going back to that, what's our shared vision for this? Like, are we working for the same thing here?
Yeah.
Do we define success for this organization the same way? If that's truly the case, then you're not in that office. You don't hold that title to hold the title. If you're here because you believe in what we're doing, we're going to work on this together. Right? That doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about understanding motives, there are folks that want to hold office because they want power or prestige, in that for any number of reasons. But when folks are in leadership roles for the right reasons, right? And I want to be clear, it's okay to want to be respected, or it's okay to want recognition. But when we're talking about taking on leadership roles, we assign value to that by folks that are trying to advance an organization or cause.
Yeah.
And if you are in those roles for the right reason, when members in your organization want to be part of that movement and advance it, you support that.
Right. 100%. When I think to it, I mean, it just ties in, right, again, to that different type of culture. And like we see that, right, those, whether it's a company, right, or a team or organization, when things get challenging, the teams that always seem to thrive and get through it are those teams that have that culture, right? That positive piece of like, hey, because there's that buy-in, right, from people, because they know they're supported and can thrive.
Right, you're talking again about the 2016 Chicago Cubs.
Yeah, there you
right?
go.
It's a lot of players, right? Coming out of the bullpen that maybe should have been starters or guys moving positions.
Right. Willing to take that.
But they were,
role.
it was not about who was team captain, who was going to be a stat leader. It was, one team, one goal.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you see that across sports all the time where teams aren't successful because that ego gets in the way of maybe a superstar, right? Or a coach and those things as well. Yeah.
There are a lot of podcasts. But have we thought about doing one about just the leadership lessons of the 2016 Chicago Cubs?
I haven't. You probably have. It seems like you put some thought into that.
Maybe that's the third time I'm invited on as a guest, or maybe that won't come. Leadership lessons from the Chicago Cubs.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'm sure you could probably write a book on that, right? Do a whole episode. I'm sure we could get into that. There's probably some great lessons there. I mean, it seems like you've already listed 3 of them so far. So, let's see here. What signs or qualities tell you someone's ready for that next level of leadership or responsibility, especially when we're trying to grow and develop leaders?
I don't care if you're ready. I do want folks to develop skills. I want folks to do that the right way. I want them to feel confident in that. But leadership can happen from anywhere in an organization. Yeah. Leadership is about using your skills and abilities to contribute to that movement at the point that you are compelled to act because that cause is so important that you can't sit that out. That's when you lead.
Yeah, okay. That's a great way to twist on that question. Something too with when we're looking at developing folks, right? Maybe throwing that element of mentorship in there. Just with sheer amount of maybe people that you're working with, you don't always have that time, right, to individually, and I think that's why it's so important that we build our leaders to go do some of that as well, right, to get that effect. But how do you balance that, right, with that prioritization of you have your job to do, right, because results matter, like you said, but then you have that other element of relationship building, and both those together is really where you see leadership flourish a lot of the time. How do you balance that, and how, because it can be tough sometimes, right, especially if you want to help the majority of people, give them time, but sometimes you don't have that time, especially when you need to put some of that time and that self-care on you. What's worked for you, I guess, in that? And I know that everyone's going to be different, but do you have any example stories, or just when you did it very well, maybe when you struggled, and what are some ways to help with that? Because it can be tough.
It is. It's tough. Folks that know how to balance that is being an emotionally intelligent leader, right? To understand what that team needs in that moment. And you'll see, and I know you know this, so many leadership theories have tried to answer that, right? you'll see different models that will actually take on separate axes and put task-oriented behaviors and relationship-oriented behaviors and almost pose those as if they're competing, right? But the truth probably, like most things, is somewhere in the middle. Right? We're most effective at getting tasks done when those relationship things have been attended to, right? If we have that rapport and trust, that's when we do our best work. But there's also times where there's a deadline, there's something that needs to be done now, and the answer is not, how are you doing? Or it's hey, we've got to do this. Can you give me a hand? And I hope, right, and you more than anybody, right, you're that person that steps up to give that hand. But that's because I think we've done some of that work before them. And so when I talk about being emotionally intelligent, it is knowing when you can do that. It's knowing the folks that you're around. It's all right. And so I think and so you ask, what are examples or things? I love that story. I'm sure you've heard me tell. Have you been to Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor?
I have not.
You've not?
No, I've not made it out that way. But you've told, I know you have.
Right. It's an institution, right? It is right when college game days in Ann Arbor. That's where they go film, right? If folks are coming from out of town, they say you've got to go to Zingerman's. I think every student that does their campus tour at that campus in Ann Arbor goes to Zingerman's, which is a way of saying if you go, don't go at lunch because that line is wild.
I bet,
right? But interestingly enough, Zingerman's, that deli, and now it's become this commercial empire. They've got a coffee shop, they've got ice cream, right? It's a whole block of businesses. They do the mail order food baskets. But really, one of their more profitable businesses is actually Zing Train, which does leadership training for a lot of corporate entities, not-for-profits, some of the work that we do. And every one of their trainings starts with the same story. And so Ari Weisenberg was one of the folks that was one of the two founders of Zingerman's Deli, will recount the story how one day in the middle of that lunch rush, right? We're talking about this is a deli that's hundreds of customers line out the door, sandwich order, move down the line, and every day is the same thing, right? Like you come in at 5 o'clock, you're slicing meat, you're stocking deli cases, probably not unlike your previous career at Jimmy John's, right? You've got a rush, right? And they spend all day getting ready for this lunch rush. After lunch, man, we've been here since 5 a.m. We just want to have our own lunch, maybe do these dishes, get some prep work done so that we can get out this door. And one time, right in the middle of this lunch rush, Ari comes up to his partner, right? They own this, and says, "Hey, we need to talk." And he kind of looks at him incredulously, like, "Now? It's in the middle. Look at this line. It's out the door." And he said, "If we don't talk now, when?" Right? And so it was that realization of that moment, needed it right then. And that was that conversation was, if we don't pause now to create a plan, right? If we don't take time to plan for success, we're going to keep doing this.
Right.
And to be clear, right, we're doing well. This is a successful business. But if we want to thrive and grow, we need to plan for that success. And if we wait for it to be convenient, that time won't come. The time is now.
Young people obviously are already leading in a lot of meaningful ways, right? Leaders of today is a tagline. We love that here. In what ways does that make you optimistic about the future for leadership? And then also, what's a pattern of an area of growth for young people you've observed? Like, what are some areas that maybe young people need to work on to maybe build some of that awareness around going in that leadership?
Well, I'm encouraged because when you work with college students every day, you know that they're our best, right? These are folks. I love the students we work with, and it's so quick, right? They come to campus, and it feels like. I mean, now, right? If you think about your time in our office as a graduate assistant, we're now graduating students that you helped select as high school students, right? It goes quick.
Feel old,
and it happens so quickly, right? Right, but if we're talking about this generation of students, I chuckle, right? Because you talk about online or generational memes or some of the older generations don't portray these folks in the most flattering light, do they? No. Right? Whether they're entitled or lazy. but we know the truth, right?
Yeah.
Because we spend time with them. This is one of the hardest working generations we've ever had. But I love the fact that we've got a generation now that also respects boundaries in their time.
Yeah.
To be clear, we've got a lot of students that are still over-involved. I see your email signatures. Once you hit that third line, maybe don't join another club,
Yeah.
right? But these are folks now that I think are putting boundaries up, that are doing things that I wish we had known to do. But more importantly, right, these are folks that have always grown up in a world where diversity has mattered, where they want a variety of perspectives. This is a group that has grown up knowing, that climate change is real and that it's our responsibility to take care of our environment. Sustainability matters to this generation. And so we're talking about this group of students. I'm incredibly encouraged because they care.
Yeah.
Right. And all of those points, they care. And that's how they live and lead, right?
Yeah.
Is that they are going to make sure that folks have voice and they know their matter and will have space. If we want to talk about trends or how I want to be I'm not qualified to tell these folks because they're doing so much more at this point in their lives than I ever did. And so I'm in no way qualified to critique or tell. They have more challenges too than we ever had, right? I talked about the competing interests, the saturation of media markets, the ways that their data is being used and stored, right? And in some senses, maybe it's this curated boutique experience, but it's also a monster, right? Like you take a look at this world and what we know about them. And I don't want to sound cliche and say, well, unplug. But I'm going to go back to that emotional intelligence piece because I think that matters. Spend time learning to listen.
Yeah. Love that. Spending time listening, building relationships, spending time in that human world, right? Maybe a little bit less of that virtual world, right? Okay. Well, we obviously have a tradition on this show where our previous guest leaves our next guest a question, not knowing who it's for. And so then obviously you get to ask the next guest a question. It's always my favorite part of the show.
I'm getting the...
You got to answer their question, and then you get to ask a question for the next person too. So the question left for you is, what is your greatest weakness as a leader?
Who asked that?
Stan Shingles.
Oh, Stan. My greatest weakness as a leader. It was easier. It's easier to catalog these when I was trying to think of my successes, and I could only come up with two, and then that list. This one seems to be easier. But how do you rank them? What my greatest weakness as a leader? And I'm going to say this sincerely, and I don't want this to sound like the cliche answer for tell me in an interview, tell me your greatest weakness is, I'm a perfectionist. Like I'll tell you what, this last year, the way I have felt things that do matter to me have been competing for my time. And I've not found an ability to balance that, right? And here's the truth, right? We can say something matters to us. Yeah. But if we don't follow that up with actions, does it? Right? Yeah. Exactly, and so I am really struggling right now to prioritize some things that are all very important in terms of where I spend my time. You mentioned earlier, right? Leading two offices now, trying to make sure I'm present with both, giving them the care that they need, but at the same time, as a father and a family, if I'm at you can't forget pickup from dance. Yeah. You got an angry 10-year-old waiting for you outside of a dance studio. That's unforgivable. Yeah. No, I left her gymnastics, not dance. And so I do think right now it's an inability to prioritize because I'm looking at all of these things and saying they all matter. But you do need to make some of those choices, or otherwise what you're saying is none of these things matter for me to prioritize. And so I need to do that.
I appreciate you sharing that. That can be really tough. I mean, I've also seen your calendar, right? It's always jam-packed. So I appreciate you finding the time to do this, right? Because I know you're super busy. And I think too people will appreciate hearing that, because I think we have this everyone's different, right? With that, what success looks like to them, what they want that to look like. But that narrative of, sometimes you always got to be constantly busy, right? And so, and for some people, they're really great at that, right? And they find that. And for others in different stages of life, but for other people, they need that time, right? And so, making sure, again, I think it ties back to this whole entire conversation of knowing yourself and making sure that you find the time for you as an individual, and to pour into yourself, because again, how can you best serve other people when you're not at your best? And so I'm finding that balance. So great way. All right, what's the question you're gonna leave for the next person?
Because I can't know who this is.
No, we're not gonna tell you. So I do know who it's gonna be, but we'll keep it in the.
I wish I could do it the other way. I'd like to ask Stan, hey, which member of the 2016 Chicago Cubs showed the best leadership ability? Let's see.
He's probably gonna watch. I know he subscribed, so I mean.
So Stan, in the comments below, tell me who you think was the best leader on the 2016 Chicago Cubs.
I love that.
So next guest on the show, can you tell me when you're recording? Will that be in the new year?
Next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, I don't want to do something cliche like a New Year's resolution, but as we come to mid or late December, maybe that's the question: is as you try and evaluate what you do well and where you want to create change, what's your process for if we're going to stay in this tone of the emotionally intelligent leader, if that first part is self-awareness, looking at that, right? Tell me how you evaluate what you do well and how do you decide where you want to focus your next area of growth? How do you make those decisions?
Cool. The process of finding your strengths and growth areas. Great. Dan, anything we didn't discuss today that you want to just throw in real quick? Any important pieces of information, whether on these topics or anything else today?
No, I appreciate the time. I mean, this leadership matters, and so when folks spend some time to talk about it, I always enjoy it.
Got to put that on a bumper sticker, right? Leadership matters. Yeah, I love saying that over here. Where can people find you too, real quick, if you don't mind sharing that? Yeah,
so probably the easiest place to find me is Powers Hall. Powers Hall 130, in here all the time. Obviously on our website, GAKEN1DM at cmich.edu, 989-774-LEAD. But really, if folks who have questions, I love it when people stop by and say, hey, I just want to talk leadership.
Yeah. I was going to say, I thought you were going to say the Coke machine in the UC.
Yeah, the Coke machine.
That's where I often find you, right? We do a little quick walk and talk, right?
3 times a week, I'll be walking to the Coke machine in the UC, and I'll see Brandon. He's like, "Oh, I was on my way to see you." I'm like, "Well, you should just hung out by the Coke machine, save me a few steps."
Yeah, exactly, right. So a little quick walk and talk meeting. Dan, thanks for being here so much. We appreciate it. Great conversation always. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Lead Into Leadership. We'll see you next time, and keep leading the way.
Thanks.
Peace.